ship apparently exploded. 5 alien occupants. All of that, we have witnesses. The one that was alive, we have a witness who saw it. My name is Tom Carey, born and raised in Philadelphia, graduate of Temple University, master's degree from California State University in anthropology. And I spent 4 years at the University of Toronto to get a doctorate in physical anthropology, but I left. I didn't quite finish up. So I was always interested in UFOs as a teenager back in the Jurassic period, and but when I was in college, I sort of lost interest, but I regained it again. And in 1980, I read a book called The Roswell Incident by William Moore and Charles Berlitz. And the case blew me away. It was not just lights in the sky, not just a single witness case, but this was a case that alleged that a UFO had crashed in New Mexico in 1947, and that there was a craft and bodies and a cover-up and death threats and all of that stuff. I said, whoa, boy, this case has everything. So about 1991, because there was no the Roswell incident book, there was no book follow-up for 10 years. I mean, after that book, 1980, there was nothing. But around 1990, 1989, there were these two fellas, Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt, were reopening the Roswell case. And I said, oh boy, I'm glad somebody's doing that, because that case really interested me. And part of the story was that the craft and the bodies were found by a group of anthropologists or anthropology students in New Mexico. And I said, oh, I wonder what happened to them. And so I called up Kevin Randall. I said, what have you done about finding the anthropologists? Because that was my major. And he said, well, we interviewed one or two, but we never got anywhere. And allegedly, they were from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where I was living at the time. I said, look, let me try to see what I can find out at the university down in Philly about this. So that's how I became actively involved in the case. This was 1991. I became actively involved trying to find the anthropology connection to the Roswell story. And I never figured that that's how many years ago? That's, I don't know, 33. That's 33 years ago next month. Never did I figure that I would have spent that much time on one case. But that's what the case required. That was the case that I was interested in. And we believe that we solved it. Linda, as we sit here, we don't believe there's any further investigation that we can do on the case. We've solved it. We know what happened. The only thing we're missing is a piece of physical evidence. That's the only thing we're missing from our investigation.
Well, let's go back to okay, so you found out these guys were from Pennsylvania. Did you ever find them? Did you?
Well, I found the two that I had called up William Moore. This is like 1991 when I first joined the case. I called up William Moore. I said, who were the archaeologists that you had mentioned in your book that were involved? And he gave me the two names. I said, okay, let me go down to University of Pennsylvania. When I'm down there, I will interview both of them, which I did. I was also looking for a third anthropologist that Stanton Friedman, who was associated with William Moore, he gave me a name as well. So I was looking for three anthropologists. Well, I interviewed the two that William Moore had given me. The first one was a fellow by the name of Bernard Wales. He said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know anything." Well, where did you get my name? I said, "Well, William Moore talked to you, and he gave me your name." I don't know anything. So that was Bernard Wales, archaeologist number one. The second one was a fellow by the name of John Cotter, Cotter. And so I had lunch with him, and we went to his office after lunch, and he started telling me all about the Roswell case. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the guy. This guy was there. He knows everything. And he finally says, well, you know what it was? I said, well, you tell me. He says it was a V-2 rocket carrying a chimpanzee. And I said, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. In the end, he lied to me because we knew it was not a V-2 rocket. And we knew they didn't use chimpanzees as test subjects. They might have sent a monkey or a dog or something, but not a chimpanzee. So I said, "Oh my goodness!" But he knew everything else. So the third one was the name of. I was looking for a anthropologist, an archaeologist. His last name was Van Buskirk. And this was a name that Stanton Friedman had given me. And Van Buskirk apparently was leading a group of archaeologist students when they stumbled upon this downed UFO. So I went to the card catalog, and the first card that I was looking under B for Buskirk, the first card I came upon was an archaeologist by the name of Buskirk. He was from New Mexico. He did his PhD work in Arizona. And the thing was, Friedman had a sketch. They called it an identikit sketch that given to him by one of the alleged witnesses. And it was of the anthropologist, the archaeologist. So he had an identikit sketch that he sent me. So I had this credit card. They don't use them anymore because they got computers now. But back then they had in the library, they had these, not credit cards, but catalog cards. This is before computers and handheld devices and that sort of thing. So the first card I came upon was this guy, Buskirk. And he had written a book published by the University of Kansas called Living Off the Land Up to 1950, some tribe in Arizona. So I said, I got the book out of the library. I said, I went up to the desk, can you get me this book? And it was the one by Winifred Buskirk was the fellow's name, Winifred Buskirk. But the book didn't have a dust cover, so I didn't have a picture of this guy, Buskirk. So I sent away to the University of Kansas, who published the book. I said, send me the dust cover for Living Off the Land Up to 1950 by this Winifred Buskirk. So 2 weeks later, in the mail comes the dust cover. It's an exact match. It was Buskirk. His picture on the dust cover was an exact match to the identikit sketch. So, and it turned out that the source for Stanton Friedman. It was a hoax. The fella hoaxed this. It was all a hoax. Winifred Buskirk, I interviewed him several times. He says, no, in 47, he was over in Arizona doing his PhD work on one of the tribes over there. And so that's how I became actively involved, was looking for the archaeologists. It turns out from another witness that John Cotter was actually one of the archaeologists there. He lied to me about the V2 rocket and the chimpanzee, but everything else he told me was the truth. And I got that from a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. So we had him nailed. And we found another archaeologist and he was not from the University of Pennsylvania. You know, if you interview one person, that person will say, well, you ought to talk to so-and-so over there. And so says, oh, you ought to talk to so-and-so. We found the leader of this archaeological team that was out in New Mexico in 1947, the summer 47. They were looking for signs of what they call butcher sites, kill sites, where Paleo Indians would take down a buffalo or something that they could have for dinner, and they would start a fire and have it was called a kill site. They were out there looking for kill sites when they stumbled upon the downed UFO, and his name was William Carey Holden from the University in Lubbock, Texas, Texas Tech. He was a combination history anthropology professor. Kevin Randall interviewed him in person. And at the time, this is like 1991, Holden said, who was 94 at the time, he said, I was there, I saw everything. To every question that Kevin asked him, he said, I was there at the crash site. I saw everything. And that's all he remembered. So that's how I became actively involved, was looking for the archaeologists, because I had a background in physical anthropology and archaeology. And that's how I became initially involved. And then later on, I just became, every aspect of the case. And here we are 33 years later. I'm still on the case, although we've written, Don Schmidt and I have co-authored 12 books. I sent you, I think, the covers of 2 of them. But we've co-authored 12 books on the subject. And we don't see the need for another one because we more or less covered everything. The only thing we're missing is a piece of physical evidence. And that's where we are at the moment. We've done a gazillion television and radio interviews. And but as I sit here, Linda, I am following a couple leads from another fellow who works with us. He's still active on the case. And I am following several leads as I sit here. So until we get a piece of physical evidence that we don't send away, we don't need to send it away and never see it again. We're not going to do that. We're looking for a piece of physical evidence that's what we call the memory metal. That's this very thin, paper thin, aluminum-like material that you can wad up in your hand, open up your hand, and it just floats there. You can't scratch it. You can't cut it. You can't permanently deform it in any way. You open up your hand and it unfurls itself. It just floats there. That's what we're looking for. We know there are pieces out there, and we're hoping that because a number of civilians got to the crash site before the military did. So we know there's pieces out there. And that's what we're looking for.
Well,
but as
take
far
us
as
back, take my audience back for those who don't know the story of the Roswell incident. There's a lot of information there. Take us
Uh,
back to that and kind of refresh our memory on that of what you discovered along the way
yeah.
and what led you, to put down so much material in books because obviously you found a lot.
Yes. The Roswell incident back in 1947 was a 2 day story. It was only a 2 day story. The first day was when the rancher where this thing crashed, he had all this wreckage on his ranch. He wanted to know who was going to clean it up. He had also seen a couple bodies. And so he drove 75 miles from Corona, New Mexico to Roswell. And he went to the sheriff's office. And he had 2 boxes of material that he brought with him. He plops it on the sheriff's desk. He says, "Sheriff, what is this stuff? I got a lot of it on my ranch. I have a sheep ranch that I run. Who's going to clean this stuff up?" And the sheriff says, "I don't know what this stuff is." And uh, so, and it was all strange material with strange writing on it. And there was a lot of this memory metal. So just then the phone rings in the sheriff's office, and it's this fellow who has a talk show. He spins records during the day. He was a what do they call him? The spin jockey, or he spins records and talks about the news. So he asks the sheriff. He says, "Do you got anything that I can talk about on the air? Or anything happening?" And he says, "Oh, well, yeah. Wait a minute. There's this guy here. He's got all this strange wreckage that he found. He thinks it might be from a UFO, or back then they called it flying saucer. They think so." He says, "Okay, put him on." And so the announcer, his name was Frank Joyce. He listens to the rancher's story, and he says, "I don't, anything that comes from the sky is the purview of the Air Force. Why don't you call the air base south of town?" Well, the air base at Roswell is the famed 509th Bomb Group, which ended World War II by dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan. This was the only atomic strike force in the world. Their whole mission was to drop atomic bombs in time of war, and they dropped 2 of them, one on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki. That's who was at Roswell, the 509th Bomb Group. So the sheriff calls the base. The base sends out the base intelligence officer named Jesse Marcel, Major. Marcel can't make anything out of this. What is this stuff? So he takes it back to the base, meets with his commanding officer. He doesn't know what it is. All this strange material. So he says, "You take somebody with you and you follow the rancher out to his ranch and take a look at what he's got out there." So that's what they did. And he found the whole field, almost a mile long by 500 feet wide, full of this strange wreckage. So he fills up his vehicle with as much as he could. He drives back to the base. They have a meeting, and the base commander, he was a full colonel, William Blanchard. He puts out the headline. He says, "Here, wait a second." He writes a headline: RAAF, Roswell Army Airfield, finds flying saucer near Roswell. And he gives that to the base public information officer named Walter Hout. And Walter Hout says, "You want me to put this out?" He says, "Yes, that's for release. Take it to the 2 radio stations, 2 papers, put it out on the wire." It goes around the world. This headline: RAAF captures flying saucer near Roswell. All around the world, everybody, they were getting calls from Europe, from China, Australia, all over the place. So it's called, we call it the headline that went around the world. So the story only mentioned the rancher's name, And no, it didn't mention the rancher's name. It said the rancher. It mentioned Jesse Marcel, the base intelligence officer. So the commanding officer says, okay, Marcel, you go home and stay there. Don't just stay there till I tell you to come back. The public information officer, he goes home. The base commander goes out to take charge of the crash site. But the Marcel, he calls back and he says, okay, you take this to commanding officer in Fort Worth, where the 509th, that was their next command, was the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth. So Fort Worth holds a press conference the same day, that afternoon. The first headline has already gone out. So the next headline is General Ramey. Now he's the commanding officer, Roger Ramey of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth. He said, fellas, it wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. So he puts out this weather balloon story, kills the story in the press. The story goes silent for the next 30 years. So you have captured flying saucer. No, the boys of the 509th with their finger on the atomic trigger made a mistake. It wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. Now you figure that one out. They'd have been better to say it was a, top secret aircraft or something, but how could the 509th bomb group with their fingers on the atomic bomb trigger not be able to tell the difference between a crashed flying saucer from another world and a common weather balloon? Nobody seemed to pick up on that, but it killed the story for 30 years. So 30 years later, 1978, the base intelligence officer, Jesse Marcel, he knows he's on his last legs with emphysema. He starts talking. I held pieces of a flying saucer back in 1947. The story gets to Stanton Friedman, who I knew well, and Friedman hooks up with William Moore, and they investigate the case, and they publish this book, like I mentioned before, called The Roswell Incident. That was the start of our investigation, was this 1980 book, The Roswell Incident. Unfortunately, there was no follow-up. So that's when Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, who I teamed up with, they started reopening the case. And here we are 33 years later. We basically have solved it. And we don't think we have over 600 witnesses, Linda. We interviewed over 600 first and second hand witnesses to the crash of a UFO flying saucer near the town of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. There's 3 sites involved in this. One site, the ship apparently exploded in midair. We think it was probably from a lightning strike, and the outer shell exploded, rained down all this debris on the sheep rancher's ranch. We think at that point there were 5 alien occupants, 5 of them. 2 of them were thrown out when the ship exploded, and they came to rest and died about 2.5 miles from the rancher's sheep ranch. So you got the explosion that occurred on the night of July the 2nd, 1947, late at night. Boom, during a thunder and lightning storm, explodes. This stuff comes down, memory metal, strange wires, strange markings, the outer shell. And 2 aliens are thrown out, met their demise on a low bluff about 2.5 miles away. But the inner cabin remained intact, and there were 3 occupants in the inner cabin. It was the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was teardrop, egg shaped. It was egg shaped. It continued on for another 30 miles and came to rest just north of the town of Roswell, about 30 miles north of Roswell. Two of the occupants were found dead, and there was one alive and walking around. So there you have the five, four dead, one still alive. And that's when the archaeologists came upon the downed craft on July the 7th. So they were out there for almost 5 days north of Roswell. Two of the occupants were dead of this egg-shaped craft. One was still alive and walking around. So the team of archaeologists headed by William Carey Holden stumbled upon this craft. They don't know they don't know what to make out of it. So they sent someone to the about a mile away was the short town of Mesa, Mesa, New Mexico. Mesa was basically a gas station. So one of them goes to Mesa, the gas station, calls the sheriff and he calls the fire department and the sheriff. Both, when one call goes to the fire department, it automatically goes to the sheriff's department too. Or if they call the sheriff's department, it automatically goes to the fire department. They thought it was a downed something, but they didn't know what it was because they didn't recognize the the aliens. And so what happens is the before the fire company can dispatch their vehicles, in comes the city manager from Roswell. Okay, fellas, don't go up there. We're going to handle it. We're going to have the Air Force. They're going to handle it. So Roswell Fire Department, you just stay here. Don't go out there. So they already know something's not right out there. So one of the crew chiefs from the fire department, he says, hell with that. And he gets in his own car. And he and his one of his buddies, they make it on out to the site. This is before the military gets there. It's before the sheriff gets there. They're the first ones there in an official, and it was on the quiet. It was on the QT. They were not authorized to do it. They just said, "Hey, let's get out there." So they go out there, and they're immediately drawn to the craft. And then they see the two bodies are sort of laying halfway in and halfway out of the egg-shaped craft. Oh my goodness, what is this? And all of a sudden, the crew chief named Dan Dwyer, he sees something moving. What's it? What is this? And he looks over and hears this creature from another world walking around. And we get this story because he was already dead by the time we got on, when we got to interview people. We got the story from his daughter. And so, and she tells us when he came home that night, his wife says, well, what kind of day did you have, dear? And he says, well, I saw a spaceship and some, they called them little people. They didn't call them aliens. They called them little people. And he says, "A little people? What are you talking about?" Well, it was from somewhere else. So he described the ship, and he described this. Well, Dad, what did it look like? Well, and the word he used was child of the earth. He just described it as child of the earth. That was his answer. And myself being from Philadelphia, I don't know what child of the earth meant. But in the Southwest, child of the earth was another name for a potato bug or something called the Jerusalem cricket. That's because the face on this alien reminded people of, no, the face on this bug was like the face of a newborn child, where the bones of the head had not fused yet. So you had these markings on the top of the head of a newborn child. And this cricket has this same markings. The head is oval shaped. It's got two eyes, and that's why they nicknamed it the child of the earth. So they said, Jerusalem cricket. Well, yeah, that's what it looked like. Well, how tall, how big was it? Well, it's about 3.5 feet tall. It had this big head, and that's, the child of the earth, the oval shaped head with the markings on the top. No nose, just two little holes where the nose was, uh, two little eyes, a little slit for mouth, and two holes on the side of the head where our ears are. Well, did you? So Frankie Rose, the child says, "Well, did you talk to it? Did you?" Yes, we talked to one another. Yes, we talked to one another, but we didn't talk like we talk by moving your mouth and your tongue and the words come out. We didn't talk like that. We talked to each other in our heads. And we today, Linda, we would call that like mental telepathy. So they talked to one another in their heads. Well, then they wanted to know, well, what did you talk about? Because they're giving him the third degree. And he says, well, I was concerned about it because I saw these two bodies in this ship and this thing's stumbling around. And he said it was interesting because this creature was more concerned about me. He was concerned about me rather than more than I was concerned about it. He says, very concerned about me. He said, the creature told him in his head, don't worry about me. I accept my fate. My comrades are dead. My ship is destroyed. There's nothing anybody can do. And that's basically what the conversation was about, that the creature was accepting its fate, and he wanted to put Dan Dwyer at ease. After, he's lost the ship, he can't go anywhere, and, and up comes the military. The military finally gets there. And the tells everybody, don't, you're all, because the archaeologists were still hanging around, they're standing by. So he threatens the military threatens the archaeologists. Don't ever talk about this. You'll lose your funding. You won't get any money for your studies, blah, 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 blah. And you, Dan Dwyer, you shut up. You'll lose your job if you talk about this. And Dan Dwyer never talked about it, only to his family. So that was for us, getting that information from the daughter was very important. So from that point on, this is like 1991, we interviewed as many people as we could, and we developed the fact that there were three sites. You had what they call the debris field site, where the ship was struck by lightning and stuff came down. That's on the evening of July the 2nd, 1947. Two aliens are blown out. They come to rest about 2.5 miles east of the debris field site. We call that the D. Proctor body site because a fellow named D. Proctor is the one who told us all about this site, where he followed Mac Brazel because they wanted to know what else was going on, and they discovered this site with the two dead aliens. I've stood on top of that site. It's a low bluff. I stood on top of that site several years ago. And the third site is what we call the impact site, Linda. That's where the remainder of the ship, the cylindrical, not the, but the egg-shaped craft the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. The rest of it went another 35 miles and came to rest just north of the town. Those are the three sites. And over the years, like I said, we interviewed up to 600 first and secondhand witnesses, every aspect. every rank we have a base yearbook from 1947 with 3,000 pictures in it of airmen and airwomen who were at the base. We tried to interview as many of those as we could. We also followed a lot of leads, like, you'll talk to somebody. Well, you ought to talk to Joe Schmo or Sam Smith. He knows a lot, and so one leads to another. And
Well, tell me,
Don,
as far as going back to the actual sites, the various sites, the first one being the debris goes down, the two that were thrown out of the craft and they're dead. What happened to those bodies? Did you interview anyone that knew what happened to those two bodies?
absolutely, absolutely. Uh, as far as I'll deal with the bodies first. The bodies, there were four deceased and one still alive. They all went to the base, the local base south of Roswell, the 509th Bomb Group. They all went to the emergency room there. And we have witnesses who took part in the transporting from the site to the base. We interviewed witnesses who transported the bodies from the crash site to the base. We have witnesses and when they went to the base, everything went to this big hangar. It was called hangar. Today it's called Building 84. It's still there, but it's a big hangar. All the stuff went there first for later disposition. Well, the bodies went from the crash site to the hangar, and then from the hangar the bodies went to the base hospital. And we interviewed people that drove them from the crash site to the base hangar. We interviewed people who transported the bodies from the hangar to the base hospital. We interviewed people who saw the bodies at the base hospital. All of that, we have witnesses. The one that was alive was we have a witness who saw it. They walk up the ramp to the base hospital. Of course, it was being helped because it had trouble walking. But we interviewed a fellow. He was doing some repairs to the one of the buildings, and he saw it. They took it out of the vehicle, and they helped it walk up the ramp into the base hospital. So we have witness to all of that. Everything, ultimately, the bodies and the wreckage all were transported to Wright Field, which is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. That's where everything went. This is before. This is about 8 years before Area 51 was built. So there's no Area 51. Everything went to Wright Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as it was later named, in Dayton, Ohio. That's where everything went. We have a lot of witnesses at Wright-Patterson who saw the stuff come in, who saw the bodies when they were there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have one of the officers who was there at the time was a lieutenant colonel named Arthur Exxon, lieutenant colonel. He was there when the stuff came in. He said, we knew the stuff was coming because it went around the base real fast. He said, I was there when the stuff came in. And let me tell you, everybody knew within 20 minutes what they had. And the consensus was that the wreckage was from space, meaning it was extraterrestrial. Within 20 minutes, they knew that. And and today you have this government task force. So we don't know what we're trying to find. They knew within 20 minutes what they had, sir. But they don't seem interested. Well, anyway, this fellow who was there in 1964, 65, he became the base commander at Wright-Patterson. So he knew everything. And I interviewed him in person. We interviewed him several times. He said they knew within 20 minutes what they had. He told us what the wreckage was made out of, and the fact that Wright Patterson. You've heard the term back engineering when they would try to back engineer something. They have a structure or a piece of metal or something. They give it to a scientific laboratory to try to recreate it. Ray Patterson did that because down the road in Columbus, Ohio, there's this Battelle Memorial Institute, big think tank, big metallurgical place. They shipped the memory metal, a lot of it, to Battelle Memorial Institute to try to recreate the memory metal, and they did. They did to a certain degree. They didn't make it. What they created was something called nitinol, Nitinol. The Ni stands for nickel. The Ti stands for titanium, which Arthur Exon, the base commander, said the wreckage was made out of titanium, but it was pure titanium, which doesn't exist on the Earth. They have to really do something to make it pure. And one other metal, he didn't know what it was. So the Ni stands for nickel, the Ti titanium, and the NOL stands for Naval Ordnance Lab. Battelle Memorial Institute didn't want to have anything to do with flying saucers. They still don't. So they farmed it out, the announcement of it, to the Naval Ordnance Lab in Maryland. And the Naval Ordnance Lab in 1962 announced the creation of this nitinol. You can put it in your web browser and click on it and see what it all looks like. And so that was their best attempt at recreating the memory metal. So that's where everything went. Where the bodies are today, we got from a deathbed confession of one of the base commanders. The bodies today, as far as we know, according to the deathbed testimony of one of the base commanders there, it's at, you've heard of Area 51? Well, the bodies, he says there's 5 of them, which there are now because the live one passed away. It's at area, what they call Area 52, the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, which was in World War II, was a test site for various weapon system, very desolate. The bodies, according to the deathbed confession, deathbed testimony of one of the base commanders, the bodies are at the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. They have a very isolated building there, no windows. We think that's the building they're at. The wreckage was moved to Area 51 in the early 1980s, and that's in near Las Vegas, Nevada. That's where the bodies went. I mean, the wreckage. And there's all sorts of stories coming out of Area 51, which you're probably aware of, regarding the analysis of the wreckage. Now, is the wreckage still there? No. As far as we know, it's not. And here's why. Because Area 51, this fellow in the late 1980s, Bob Lazar was his name, claimed to have worked at Area 51. And then his claim was that he worked on several UFOs in Area 51. Area 51 was built in 1955 to build and test our spy planes. The U-2, which was a spy plane. This is before satellites took over. This is a high-flying spy plane, a U-2, which flew at 70,000 feet, was actually shot down by the Russians. They overflew Russia. It was actually shot down by the Russians in 1960. And there was a big trial there. Francis Gary Powers, stood trial there for spying, and then they had a spy exchange later on. So the U-2 spy plane, and then the SR-71 Blackbird, a higher, faster version of it, was developed there at Area 51. But this fellow named Robert Lazar in the late 1980s claimed to have worked on flying saucers, UFOs at Area 51. So he became known all over the world, like, oh my goodness, that's where the wreckage is, and blah 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 blah. So I know whenever I give a talk, I'll ask the audience, I'll say, how many of you have ever heard of Area 51? And all the hands go up because of the flying saucers, UFOs. Well, how many of you have ever heard of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Maybe one hand will go up. That's it. They don't know about Wright-Patterson. But Area 51 was becoming too well known. And of course, the Air Force claims that they had dropped out of investigating UFOs in 1969 after the University of Colorado did a study and said there's no worthwhile knowledge to be gained by studying UFOs. So the Air Force took that as their cue to wrap up Project Blue Book, which was their investigation of UFOs in 1969. So does that mean the UFOs went away? No, they're still out there. People still reporting them. So on the secret, on the QT, the Air Force creates the so-called UFO task force. And it's because of one senator, he's dead now, Harry Reid from Nevada, was very interested in UFOs. And he created this UFO task force. And the first one was called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So they have these crazy names. And his good friend was a billionaire. His good friend was a billionaire named Robert Bigelow. I keep having these things pop up. Robert Bigelow had this big company. He was in aerospace. He had an aerospace company, produced things under government contract for the government, the Defense Department already. So that's where all of this stuff wound up. And as I talk to you today, that's where I believe that all of the original stuff that went to Wright Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, then to Area 51, is now residing at Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas, Nevada. And we learned that from Freedom of Information Act requests. The Defense Intelligence Agency gave us that. Believe it or not, a friend of mine in Florida, he filed a FOIA. That's what they call them, a FOIA request to the Defense Department. They sent it to the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is in charge of all the intelligence agencies. And he finally got a reply. His question was, where is the UFO material residing today? And he got an answer. And it was Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas, Nevada. And on top of that, they not only got the location, but what analyses were being carried out on the wreckage. It was more than he actually had bargained for. So that's what I can tell you today as to where this stuff is. And it all began with the Roswell crash of 1947. I don't know if there have been other crashes. People claim there were, but the one that I worked on was the Roswell crash because our mandate, Linda, was to find and interview as many surviving first and second hand witnesses to this 1947 event that we could. And that's what we did. And like I said, we've written, Don Schmidt and I have written 12 books on the subject. I sent you covers of two because I have a new computer here, and for some reason I can't shrink them down. Otherwise, I would have sent you the covers of all 12 of them. and but
Well,
you get the idea.
you must have found an enormous amount of information to put together so much material for so many books. What, out of all of your research, what do you think was the most fascinating or surprising of what you discovered?
Yes. The I always, I talk about the top five witnesses, and the one of the first things we discovered was that the press conference from General Ramey at Fort Worth, right after the big headline went out that the Roswell Army Airfield had captured a flying saucer, we got from the fellow who was with Ramey that day, his base deputy commander, his base adjutant was a name. His name was Thomas J. Oh my goodness. Uh, it'll come to me when we're done. But his deputy base commander, we interviewed him. He told us on video. We have a videotape of him uh, saying that press conference, the weather balloon press conference, was a fake. It was put together real fast to get the press off the story. We got that from, and this fellow is pictured with Ramey that day. Oh, Thomas J. Dubose. He was a full colonel. Thomas Dubose. We interviewed him in 1991. He said the press conference, the weather balloon press conference, was a fake to get the press off the story. And once and that's good to know because a lot of people, they say, oh, well, they had that press conference and it was a weather balloon. Well, no, we got it from the guy who was there when the press weather balloon story was created. The other one, and the one that I like, is the the crash sites. They were uh, secured by the military police. The base, every base has military police. So all the crash sites were secured by military police from the 509th Bomb Group. Well, Kevin Randall interviewed the chief, the head guy of the military police on the base. He was still alive in 1990, 1989, 1990. And to every one of Kevin Randall's questions, his name was Colonel Edwin Easley. Colonel Edwin Easley died in 1981 or 82. And to every one of Kevin's questions, he answered, "I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I'm sworn to secrecy." Every question, I'm sworn to secrecy, sworn to secrecy. So Kevin, you know, he's and just he just as a final question, he just throws out well, can you tell us at least if we're going in the right direction or not? He throws that out to Easley. So Easley, there's a long pause. So Easley finally says, well, let me put it this way. Oh no, first he says, well, what direction is that you're talking about? And Kevin says, well, that it was a crashed flying saucer, that it was a crashed UFO. That's the direction we're going in, and we think that's what it was. So Easley says, well, let me put it to you this way. You're not going in the wrong direction. That was like, whoa. So between Easley and Thomas Dubose, we're on that case. Otherwise, it would have been like, well, it's a fake. There's nothing to it. Let's go home. But those two witnesses, plus Arthur Exxon, who was the base commanding officer, saying that they knew what it was within 20 minutes. and that it was extraterrestrial. Things like that. Um, the biggest surprise will be if and when we get a piece of memory metal. That's all we're looking for right now, because uh, we've got everything else. 600 people we interviewed, first and second hand witnesses. We got a number of deathbed confessions. Those are always good because deathbed confessions are considered extra special testimony in courts of law, because feeling being that a person who's dying, it's a dying declaration. You want to clear you want to clear everything up uh, before you go, so that sort of stuff. Um,
Was there any information ever as to where they were from in space?
Good question. Good question. And I do have an answer for you. Uh, in our interviews, our mandate was to find out what we could get from witnesses. And even between us, the subject of where they were from never came up. It never came up. We never talked about, and we get the question all the time. Well, where were they from? We never discussed that. Why were they here? We can only speculate why they were here, because and why New Mexico had the most sightings is because New Mexico is where all the atomic research was going on. That's where the first atomic bomb was detonated. That's where subsequent atomic bombs were detonated, there in Nevada. But so we speculate that they were interested in New Mexico because of the atomic research. Now, as to where they were from, you had this story about some of these abductees. They go to a planet called Zeta Reticuli, some binary star system in the galaxy, the Milky Way, and I never paid too much attention to that because it was all just, you know, uh, to me it was, I don't know, it just didn't ring with me. But let me tell you, uh, one of the you've heard of the Operation Paperclip, when during World War II, the late stages of World War II, both the Soviet Union and the Western Allies were trying to gobble up as many of the rocket scientists as they could. So the chase was on, and the top scientist that everybody was looking for was Werner von Braun. And fortunately, the Western Allies, the United States, we were the ones to capture Werner von Braun and his immediate team. And Werner von Braun is now known as the father of the American space program. He passed away in, I don't know, 87, 1980. He was very young when he passed away, only in his 60s. But he was the father of our space program. Well, one of his high deputies was a fellow named Ernst Steinhoff, was a physicist, PhD physicist, rocket scientist. And instead of moving to Huntsville, Alabama with von Braun, he stayed in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where research was being conducted for first on the V2 rockets that the Germans had built during World War II. They started testing V2 rockets and then trying to develop rockets of our own. And also research was done on jet-propelled guided missiles, the Beaumark, the Snark, and so he was into that. So he stayed in Alamogordo. Uh, I forget the name of the air base there. Holloman Air Force Base. Okay, Holloman Air Force Base. That's where they also had the fast moving sled where they ground. How fast can you go on the ground? That's where all that stuff was taking place. Well, Ernst Steinhoff was the uh, sort of the consultant. He was in operate. They also brought over an Operation Paperclip. He stayed in Alamogordo, Holloman Air Force Base, and he helped develop the V2 rocket. He was sort of the consultant on V2 rockets, and also he was really into the guided missile development. But he also, according to his, he had two sons, Hans and Ralph. Hans was the older son because when I got to him, he was already passed away, but his two sons are alive. The older son was Hans, and according to a third party who was a medical doctor, German, he was good friends with Ernst Steinhoff. He says he comes into the museum down in Roswell, the UFO museum, where Don Schmidt and I would go every July to speak during their UFO festival. In comes this fellow, Doctor Dr. Niels Blesius. Can't pronounce his last name. He says, the fellow you want to talk to is Ernst Steinhoff's son. Ernst I knew well, and he was involved in the recovery of the Roswell crash, and he told me all about it, that he got to see the bodies and all that sort of stuff. So he's dead now, and you want to interview his two sons, Hans and Ralph. Well, I interviewed Hans first. And Hans, I don't know anything. I said, wait a minute, you're a doctor yourself, and your father was a physicist, and you don't know anything about. No, I was we never talked about it. So I'm going, oh my goodness, this is terrible. He's not going to tell me anything. So Hans and I hung up. So the next one was the younger son, Ralph. I interviewed Ralph, and I'm starting to get, oh, I don't know anything either. I just, I'm a medical doctor, blah, 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 blah. Oh, no, by the way, you know, um, uh, the Roswell crash was not extraterrestrial. It wasn't? No, it was not extraterrestrial. It was extra dimensional. Uh-oh. How would a guy that he doesn't know anything about all of a sudden saying he knows that it was extra dimensional. So only one place he could have got that, because his father was heavily involved in the research on the Roswell craft. It was extra dimensional. And oh, by the way, what was the mass to weight ratio? I'm thinking, wait a minute, this fellow's supposed to be a medical doctor, and he's talking about the mass to weight ratio of the craft, and that it was interdimensional. He had to get that from his father. So I said, oh, I don't know what the mass to weight ratio is, but thank you for that information about where it came from. So I just filed that away. Well, maybe 6 months later, I was talking to a fellow researcher. His name was Bill Burns. He's got a PhD and a law degree, and I was talking to him about Roswell, and he says, "Oh, by the way," he says, I was interviewed a fellow in another story out in California. He was a Navy guy. He was a Navy commander named George Hoover." I said, "Well, that's nice. What about him?" He says, "Well, George was actually on Werner von Braun's team on UFOs. He was on his UFO team, and von Braun was called out to the site to help identify, to see if it was Russian or not. He saw everything. And you ought to talk to the sons, because Ernst is gone. Talk to the sons." I said, "Well, I did. I talked to Hans, but he didn't know anything." He says, "Well," and I talked to Ralph, and he said it was interdimensional. He says, "Well," this is Bill Burns. So he says, "Well, I was interviewing this fellow George Hoover, who was on Werner von Braun's team, and he was heavily involved in Roswell. And he said it was so. Hoover tells Bill Burns it was not extraterrestrial; it was extra temporal, i.e., they were time travelers. So I've got one fellow saying it was interdimensional, the other fellow saying it was uh, that was extra temporal, that they were time travelers. So that's the best I can do, Linda. Other than that, my mind is open to the fact that they were time travelers, and that at the time of the Roswell crash, they were in their corporeal, as they say it, their corporeal state or physical state. And that's the best I can do, because we never ourselves discussed what planet they, where they could have been from in the universe. But I have grown interest as we speak in time travel and the things. And here's the exclamation point to that story, is that when we got the information from the Defense Intelligence Agency last year, they told us some of the things that they were uh, analyzing and working on at Bigelow Aerospace, and one of them was time travel, shrinking the speed of light, invisible cloaking, and working with time travel. So if someone puts a gun to my head and it says, okay, where were they from? I would say the best information I have is that they were time travelers. And that's the best I can tell you.
Did you ever follow up on any of that with other people outside of just Roswell witnesses and people who knew of that kind of research?
Not in person, but I am researching the literature. Most of that literature, Linda, is over my head. I'm a basically a gumshoe detective, you know, just the facts, ma'am, just the truth. But I am researching, and there is a lot of research on this, and that's where I am at. I'm researching right now the literature on that, because that's the best I can do. Uh, I don't buy this Zeta Reticula thing and that story, but coming from George Commander George Hoover, who was worked with Werner von Braun, and coming from the son of Ernst Steinhoff, who was second in command to Ernest Werner von Braun, and heavily involved in the research on the Roswell wreckage. It's not like you're talking to Uncle Harry over a beer, you know. These two guys are educated and they were in the right place at the right time. And that's what they say it was. So I have to give that some extra special credence as we speak.
As to the bodies that were taken, and do you know if there was any kind of information out on anything discovered regarding those bodies, and the one that was living, I presume, died? Any information on what happened to them?
Yes, we get it from there was a in World War II. There was this night fighter pilot named Marion, and his nickname was Black Mac Magruder. He was a night fighter pilot. He was a commander in the Pacific Theater. He had five sons, uh, Mark, Marion, Merritt. They were all began, five sons, their last names all began with M. I can't remember all five. But in interviewing the most talkative of the sons, he told us about his father. And he said his father, after World War II, they have the what they call the Air War College class. This is where they train the best and the brightest of the military officers to lead the military service branches into the next century, the best and the brightest. And the Air War College class was held at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And this Mike, I'll say his name was Mike Magruder, the son. They said his father was in the 1947-48 class of the Air War College. And the class began in the fall of 47 and ended in the spring of 48. And on one week, they were flown. This would be in April of 19, because we have the physical records. In April of 1948, the Air War College class, which consisted of 90 high-ranking officers from the grades lieutenant colonel up through brigadier general. Those were and Magruder's father was a lieutenant colonel at the time. The Marine Corps, he was a Marine. He flew a Marine aircraft in World War II. So the class was flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the spring of 1948. And he got this story from his father. And so one day, the class is taken into this hangar on the base, Wright-Patterson. And so they're thinking, what are we doing here? We're all standing around here in this hangar, and the door opens up, and out are pushed these gurneys or these tables that they could roll. A couple of these tables they rolled out, and on the tables are this strange wreckage, mostly that included this memory metal. So they wanted all these officers who they felt were the best and the brightest, they wanted their opinion about this metal. Of course, they didn't know what it was. The thing was, what is this stuff? Where did you get it? Because some metal they couldn't bend at all, and other pieces they could do the old wad it up and it would unfurl itself and all that sort of stuff. They said, well, fellas, we got it from the crash of a flying saucer last summer in New Mexico. That's all they were told. Well, isn't that nice? Well, we don't know what it was, but that's that. If you're telling us that's what it was, that's what it was. So they're taken inside the room. They go down the hallway. They're taken into another room, and here is this big mirror on the wall. It's a two-way mirror. They can see through, but whatever's on the other side can't see anything but a blank space. So they say, okay, fellas, look through that mirror. So they look through the mirror, and inside is the one that was alive. We call it the live one. It was the live alien from Roswell. Now, I don't know if it was sitting down, standing up, doing push-ups, or doing the Macarena. I don't know what it was doing. But so the father told the son, he said, it was standing there, and all of a sudden I was overcome by sympathy for it. He said, I was just overwhelmed by a feeling of sympathy for it. And I sensed its human qualities rather than its alien qualities. They didn't talk to one another. He just was overcome with this feeling of unity, its human qualities rather than its alien qualities. And they didn't talk to it. And that was, but he also said, well, whatever happened to it, Dad? He said, well, they killed it. They killed it. Now, that doesn't mean that they stood it up against the wall like the Valentine Days massacre from the 1920s. They just meant that they were doing some sort of experiment on it or with it, and it succumbed during the experiment. And the year that we get is 1952. We believe it lasted until 1952 when it succumbed to some sort of experiment they were doing with it or on it. No doubt there are write-ups about what they know from it but we've never seen it. So that's the best I can do. That's when it died, and it wound up at Dugway with its four other companions, and that's all we know about it. I'm sure that they wrote up what they learned from it and what experiments or analysis they did with it. But getting that sort of stuff is like pulling. It's even worse than pulling teeth because we can't get at it. So
So no further information on maybe any kind of intellectual information they got from this one, nor from the actual bodies of the deceased either.
oh yeah, the bodies they loaned around to various military facilities, and they did autopsies on them. And we have a big write up. We got it from Arthur Exon, who didn't see the autopsies himself, but he knew the doctors who did the autopsies at Wright Patterson. And there was a in 1995 there was this show on Fox called The Alien Autopsy. Well, that is a fake. I don't know if you saw that or not, but that alien autopsy uh, thing that Fox put together in 1995 is a fake. So, but we do have some information about the creature's physical makeup from the autopsies that were conducted at Wright Patterson, and it the the autopsy it didn't have like lungs like we have or a heart. It had other, it had a black something black, like I guess was their blood or something like that. But it's very I'd have to look it up again because it wasn't like what we have, a heart and lungs and all. And one thing we did learn was that its mouth was just a cavity. It didn't go anywhere. Like our mouth goes to our throat and down to our stomach and the digestive tract. Well, its mouth was just a hollow cavity. It didn't go anywhere. So what did it do for food? We don't know. And but its overriding feature was its large pear-shaped head with no nose, just two holes, uh, two eyes, a slit about an inch wide for a mouth, and two holes where the ears are. And apparently it talked by mental telepathy. And that's all I can tell you at the moment. I'd have to reread all of that stuff, but it could have been, it could have been some things remind you of an insect. It might have been insect like, because that some of the things sounded like insect or insectoid, but I couldn't tell you right now myself.
Well, some people have talked about the time travel aspect of these things and that they might possibly be humans in the future. And this
Yes,
is
in
kind of a
fact,
way of evolving. Yeah.
George Hoover, who I mentioned to you earlier, actually said that. He said that they were time travelers, might even be us from a future Earth. Those were his words. Time travelers, perhaps from a future Earth. Us from a future Earth. That was what George Hoover said. So coming from him, I have to give that extra weight.
Yeah, I mean, it's all speculation, of course, because we can't know for sure on things like that, but it is quite interesting to talk about or to think about, and I'm sure there's a lot more information out there than you and I know
Right.
at this particular point in time. What else haven't we talked about? What else did you discover, or even just your theories or ideas about all of this?
About what?
About just UFOs in general.
Oh, um, the thing is, what's bothering me is that you have these government committees and task force now pretending that they're trying to find out if there's anything to the UAPs, they call them, uh, unidentified aerial phenomena. Well, they already have the answer. They already have it in their possession from Roswell and perhaps other crashes that have occurred. They already have the evidence, but they're pretending that they don't have anything that we're going to find out. They've created this committee, and all these protocols, and that you have to have radar data, you have to have video, all these things that they're going to run through their algorithms that's going to give them they already have the answer. All of this is for show as far as I'm concerned. So that they've been quoted already. Well, we have seen they've investigated through their algorithms and their machines over 800 cases, new cases. Well, we found nothing that is of a non-human nature. I'm sorry, but you're either lying or you're not interested, because you already have that stuff. It's in Bigelow Aerospace for one location. I would think there's another location. Lockheed Martin, I would think, in California has stuff, and other because there are 8 national laboratories that are administered by Battelle Memorial Institute. Battelle is where all the stuff went first, and now there's 8 uh, labs altogether that Battelle runs. And I have to tell you, I had one fellow worked at Lawrence Livermore, which is one of the Battelle Livermores in California. He emails me one day. He says, I work at Lawrence Livermore lab. We were given this strange wreckage, this strange metal, to try to solve what it was. And he found out through the grapevine that it was from Roswell. And he said, I will send you a picture of a piece of this as long as you don't share it with anybody. So he sent me the picture. I have this picture of that he says is a piece of the wreckage from Roswell. It's undescript because it's in a test tube. That's how small it is. It's a piece of something in a test tube. It doesn't prove anything to anybody, but he said it's from the Roswell wreckage. So I will take him at his word. And so that's Lawrence Livermore Lab in California. We have another witness who saw some at Hill Air Force Base. He saw a body, an alien body from Roswell at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. I myself apparently missed one by a year. When I was in the Air Force, I had a case of walking pneumonia, and I spent a night at the Wilford Hall, which is the base hospital at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And that was in 1963. Well, we have a case of an Air Force officer who witnessed an autopsy of one of the Roswell occupants in 1964. So I missed him by about a year. And that was done at Wilford Hall at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So it's just amazing. We have one of our books is called Touched by Roswell. It's a book about all the famous people uh, actors, actresses, famous people uh, uh, that cross paths with Roswell at some point in their life. And that doesn't mean they saw the bodies or anything, but that somehow they had the subject of Roswell and them crossed at some point in their life. Like Elvis Presley, his personal aircraft, it was a Lockheed Jetstar or something like that. It was flaming red. It was all red velvet interior. After Elvis died in 1967, it spent the next 35 years at the Roswell base, 50 feet, 50 yards from where the bodies were loaded in, where the bodies were loaded into a C-54 to be transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. His his airplane, I took pictures of it, was stored for 35 years, 50 yards from where the alien bodies had been in a box and loaded into a plane for delivery to Wright-Patterson. And so that's just one fortuitous case where Elvis, everybody knows Elvis, said that his personal plane was right near where the aliens were shipped off the base. So,
And of all of the 600 people you interviewed, did any of them indicate, or did you even ask if any of them had had any UFO sightings or any other type of UFO, any form of encounter whatsoever?
well, none of them had anything like Roswell. Some of them, I myself have had three sightings, uh, uh, but nothing like Roswell. None of them talked about another crash, and I did have one fellow who did claim to have stumbled upon a craft. This is before Roswell, in 1945, in San Antonio, New Mexico. He claimed to have stumbled upon a downed UFO in 1945, and I interviewed him, and I felt his story was made up. I didn't feel it was real because we had no other witness, and we had a lot of them. No one ever mentioned a crash before Roswell. Uh, well, and there was another one who, and it's claimed it was in 1941 in uh, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And the problem with that one, Linda, it's only got one You can't have a case like a crash and only have one witness. I mean, you have to have corroborating witnesses. We have like 600. That's the thing about Roswell that makes it different, is that we have 600 first and second-hand witnesses to a case. The Cape Girardeau, as far as I know, there's only one witness, and that's not enough. And same with that 1945 case, there was only the teller of the story and one other witness, and the other witness said that it didn't happen. So there's no other case that I know of like Roswell. There was one in South America, Vargina, but there's so many different stories about that. Uh, it happened in I don't know, was it it's either Peru or Brazil, probably Brazil. But there's so many different stories about that case. I just don't know what to think. But in this case, you have 600 first and second hand witnesses all talking about the same thing. All the ones that saw the bodies, they describe it the same as they're all the same. And they go from brigadier generals down to buck privates, every rank in the military. Uh, a lot of, some famous people. And
Well, tell me about the three sightings that you personally had.
yes, the first one was when I was in the Air Force. I was stationed at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. And I was standing outside. This was like at noon, around noontime during the day, sunny day. And I'm outside waiting for a ride, outside the barracks, waiting for a ride to go somewhere. I don't know where we were going, but so I'm standing outside and I look up and there's this circular, bright white object, like if you took a silver dollar and held it at arm's length, that's how big it was. And it was right overhead, and it wasn't the moon. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, look at that. I wonder what that thing is. Perfect circle. It was a light source. It was not reflecting light. It was a source of light. So I'm looking at that for about 10 minutes. It's just sitting there. And someone comes out and says, Tom, you have a phone call inside. So I went inside, took the phone call, which lasted about 30 seconds. And I came back out. It was gone. Now I'm thinking, wait a minute here. Now, if that was a balloon and it burst, it would still be coming down. I would see it floating down. If it was a regular aircraft of some sort, but circular, I would see it going away. But it was totally gone in 30 seconds, and I don't know anything that could do that. And also, the other thing I'm thinking is, how come no one else saw that? Why was I the only one to see that? And at the time I looked, actually didn't see anybody else around. That was the thing. And so that was my first sighting. I don't know what it was. It was circular, right overhead, uh, and it disappeared apparently very quickly. The second one was about, I'd say about 6, 7 years ago. I'm flying home from Roswell, New Mexico in July after having participated in the UFO festival where Don Schmidt and I were speakers every year. So I'm sitting in the window seat on the right. I'm in a window seat on the right, and I'm looking out the window of the aircraft. We're approaching Philadelphia. We haven't reached Philadelphia yet, but we're approaching Philadelphia, and I look out the window. I see all these clouds. I say, I'm thinking to myself, here I am. I don't know. I've flown a gazillion times. How come I've never seen a UFO up while I'm flying up here? Well, lo and behold, I no sooner have that thought than here is a wingless cylindrical craft. I thought it was another plane until I realized it didn't have any wings. And it's actually going slower than our aircraft, our passenger plane. It actually came in to my view from, if you're looking out the window, it was ahead of us, but going slower than our plane. So it's gradually drifting back. And the whole sighting lasted about 5 minutes. It was an aircraft or a craft circular. It looked, I thought it looked almost rocket shaped, or the shape of a aircraft, but without any wings or without a, a tail. And I can't remember if it had windows or not, but it's going slower than the plane. And I'm thinking, how is that thing flying? And it's going slower than our plane. And it finally drifted out of sight into the back. So I said, geez, I don't know what that was. So we finally go into our descent path. Our plane goes into its descent into Philadelphia International Airport. And here comes this craft that I had seen. It's coming right across, diagonally across our flight path in front. Now, if you're in your descent path, that can't happen. You can't have an aircraft coming at you right across your descent path. It passed within, I would say it passed within 300 feet of our plane as we're descending into Philadelphia. To cut right across our path, left to right, and flew away. And that was the craft that I had seen out my right window. And so that was my second, that obviously a UFO, a plane. It was not a plane, and it would not have been given permission to cross our flight descent path like that. So that was my second one. The third one occurred right over my house here in Huntington Valley. I live right outside of Philadelphia, and I'm outside. I don't know if I was cutting the grass or I was doing something out on our front lawn, and this triangular shaped craft, totally silent, no markings on it, flew right over my head. Not real fast, but enough I could see it was triangular shaped. It was beige colored, no markings on it. Uh, Flew very silently right over my head from back to front and flew away. I have no idea what that was. I never saw anything like it before or since. So that was my third sighting.
Wow. Well, you certainly have a lot of information on Roswell, the UFO incident, the crash, and your personal experiences as well. You do your homework. That's all I can say. You really have a wealth of information about the subject.
Well, thank you. It's been a real quest. Now you have to figure it has to be something interesting to hold your interest for 33 years, right? Uh,
Yes.
is that you or me?
Oh, that's me. Yes, I said yes.
Yeah. So uh, it's been the most interesting, to hold your interest like that for 33. And the thing is, Linda, every time you get a hit on a witness, it re-energizes you to keep going because you get more misses than you do get hits. You get more people, I don't know anything, blah, 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 goodbye. But when you get somebody who knows something, it just re-energizes you to continue on.
For
And
sure.
that's where I am today. Like I said, my research is right now is with time travel, which I never thought I'd do because usually it goes over my head. But I am researching time travel.
I think
Uh,
you may be onto something there. I think there's probably a lot more to that than the average person out here, you and I both put together, probably know about. But I
yes,
think I think it's coming. I think we'll have more information in a few years.
and there seems to be more talk about it as well. There seems to be more talk about it as well. So,
Yes,
but that's where I'm going, uh, and like I said, we had never talked about where they are from or why they were. Well, we're always asked the question about why were they here, and that the modern age of UFOs began in 1940s, 47, June of 47, with Kenneth Arnold sighting, and that's when it all began. The modern age of UFOs. It appears that they've been with us the whole time, and but that's where it began. The current wave of UFOs began in 47, and but it's very interesting. I'm still on the case, but not. I don't go out traveling unless it's something really, really hot. You know what I mean? But we feel we have the case. If you get one of our books, the, the most recent one is Witness to Roswell. It's our third edition. It's the 75th anniversary edition. It came out in 2022. So that's the 75th anniversary edition, our most recent book.
sounds
So,
great. I'm going to go ahead and end our interview today. I'll let you know when this comes out, and it just holds my attention. I have been interested in the subject for a long time as well.
okay, I hope you read one of our books. We're told
Well,
that people who read them, they can't put them down.